Now we're starting.
Okay, ready to start?
Yeah, talk loud.
Okay, so transgenders should be treated as their biological gender. This is because the difference between boys and girls are so big, and it just gets bigger as they get older. There's a lot of transgenders who change their mind after the surgery or after starting to take hormones. And they do this because feelings change all the time. Feelings does not stay consistent. And we can also see the difference in sports because men are naturally faster and stronger than women.
Okay. So, transgender and transgenders has been coined as a medical term that has been more prevalently used in this century in society, especially. And it's been used more of as an umbrella term, and it defines individuals as whose gender identity, or how we understand it, of their self-understanding of their gender, differs from the sex and gender from which they were assigned at birth. So most people who claim to fall under this diagnosis do not consider themselves as matching a gender or a binary gender category. In fact, many of these patients fall under newly made terms such as genderqueer or transvestite, agender. The list goes on and on. But over time, it's been debated whether these individuals deserve to be treated with the identity they claim to be, or against the biological sex that they are. So although this dysphoria has been thought to either be a psychological or biological issue, we don't think transgenders deserve any special accommodations within their rights and privileges. However, the statement is no demotion of the human qualities that all people inhabit. So, and that includes transgenders. So we believe everyone should be treated equally. And these types of statements counter the discrimination this particular community receives, and that encapsulates the discrimination in the major areas such as medicinal treatment and civil rights.
All right, your first point.
You got it. Okay. So we need to treat transgenders as their biological sex when it comes to medicine. Even though a boy wants to be a girl, he cannot get medications for a girl because that won't help him. Yes, a lot of medications can be used for both genders, but medicine has a different effect on boys and girls. An article from Everyday Health talks about that women has a larger storage of fat than men. And all medications that is fat soluble, which dissolves in fat before it goes to the brain, will then distribute differently for a woman. And some medicine that has this, several medications used in psychiatry, which includes anti-anxiety and antidepressants. And a quote from Ryan Anderson is, "Hormones and surgery cannot actually transform a man into a woman or a woman into a man." He continues on writing about people he tracked down after they've taken the surgery. And most of them don't regret the surgery, but they still have the same problems, like work, emotions, and relationships. And according to Charlie Henderson, a person who starts taking testosterone will not get their body back. They will still be a bit taller, have bigger hands, feet, have a wider jaw, and a deeper voice. When we look at this, we shouldn't treat them as the gender that they want, because it doesn't even take away their problems. It doesn't change their gender. And the suicide rate among transgenders is super high. Statistics says that over half of transgender males and 29.9% of women has attempted suicide. And parts of this is because they regret their surgery. An article from USA Today says, "You'll hear media say regret is rare, but they don't read my inbox, which is full of messages from transgender individuals who want the life and the body back that was taken from them by cross-sex hormones, surgery, and living under a new identity." And it continues on by saying, "Had I not been misled by media stories of sex change success by medical practitioners who said transitioning was the answers to my problems, I wouldn't have suffered as I had. Genetics cannot be changed. Feelings, however, can and do change. So we need to treat transgenders as their biological gender because feelings change all the time. And if we continue treating them as they want, more people will get confused and end up regretting what they've done."
Okay.
Yeah.
So, on the psychological part, I'd like to disagree with you there because I don't really believe that males and females do have that different of a psychological makeup, and the American Psychological Association would back me up. In 2005, they analyzed 46 different studies, which were conducted in the previous 20 years, so like from the 80s to the 2005, and those studies centered on the psychological differences between male and females. And psychologist Jeanette Shibley Hyde, PhD at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, discovered that males and females really do not have that many differences and are actually more alike than different. Furthermore, she found that in one of the studies that males acted differently when they, depending on the context. So when they were told that their gender would not be recorded, they acted much more docile, and women acted more aggressive. Whereas when they were told that their gender would be recorded, they acted as you would see in like the stereotypes, which shows that, you know, how we act as in our stereotypes can vary, and, you know, that's not really what defines us. Moreover, you mentioned the suicide rate, and that is very sad. But I'd like to bring up the point of, let's see, Lauren Aerosmith. She's a female transgender. So I'll talk about her later again in another point. But she lived with transgenderism. She was gender dysphoria for a long time. She felt up to 50 years old that she was always the opposite gender. She got married to a female and would even try on her or his wife's clothes just to, you know, feel as he really was. In 2008, he attempted to kill himself by standing in front of a truck because he was tired of living a life that was not his, until he got a transgender surgery, which allowed him to be the person who he really was, a female. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is incorporating these people, identifying, you know, what the problem is, and focusing on that and giving them what they need. And what they need is to feel how they really are. Yeah, that's all I got. So.
Nice.
Well, that prefaces our first point, which targets discrimination. A lot of people within this particular realm of politics bring up separate but equal, the idea of that and the notion and how it supports it. And a lot of comparisons can be driven from the equal rights, which we believe should be sustained in all of society, in every single individual. So discrimination, a lot of it derives from why these people feel this way and why they feel a change. It can be a part of, and it's an everyday experience that these people go through and can affect nearly every aspect in their life. And it can require really huge changes. There was a survey done by the National Transgender Discrimination Society that showed in every single statistical area, whether that be due to lost jobs, evictions, or housing denied, harassment on the job due to bias, more than 70% in all of those areas showed positive. That people were being treated this way, harassed, assaulted, evicted, whatsoever, etc. And the transphobia that drives from this discrimination is exacerbated with the trans person, and that's independent of their color or the faces that compound their race. And a lot of these people try to look for these clear non-discrimination laws. And when we're dealing with discrimination, that's what these people need, and that's what this country needs to find equality. So, the laws covering these gender identity, as of now, in expression, and there are certain expressions that they exhibit on these people, they're a more important part of the solution because that's what can help stop the discrimination. That's been a huge part of their lives. So the clear laws often cause, these laws often cause businesses to have policies against discrimination, but some of these laws in the books don't always translate to actual fair treatment. And that's just a part of the nature we all have and how we can twist it, but that's another debate. But clear laws, at this point, much of the protection can be found under the federal and state laws. But we can learn more about how people really need to learn and know what their rights are. And the resources can derive from the National Committee of Teaching English, and they're just a partnered source with the federal and state governments and how they create and develop these laws and try to execute them into the nation. Other partner resources have come up with an Equality Act, which was just this past March. And it's exactly, and I think the act is exactly what transgender people really need to know. So it was a bipartisan group in Congress that actually introduced the Equality Act. And it was a piece of legislation that would essentially, explicitly and strongly extend the civil rights and protections to cover the LGBTQ people community. And so we need moments and actions like these that'll create an ambition to sustain order, and it comes along, and it correlates with Jacob's point on stopping discrimination. And this is really what it does, and it'll tell us who is really covered by this Equality Act, which should be all people.
Great, very well said.
Thank you.
Is that the end of your point?
It is.
Okay, so when I looked at discrimination, I looked at it in like specific ways, because in today's society, the transgender movement is definitely a really big thing right now. And so I feel like, and I don't feel like it's fact that if you would stand out, like if you would tweet something, say something in like discriminating against transgender people, you would just be attacked by media and so many different people because they're so for the transgender movement. And so I'm looking from, like, I chose specific things. So one thing I want to focus on, like talking about like they feel discriminated about the bathroom situation. And so I want to talk about how it just makes people feel uncomfortable, and there's a reason why we have a male and female bathroom, because of like obvious reasons. And this is going to kind of get a little awkward, but I feel like I need to say this to like emphasize the point that I'm trying to make as to why there should be two different types of bathrooms. Men have penises. When they go to the bathroom, they have to take them out and use them. Think about little girls, anyone coming in and seeing that. That just makes everyone uncomfortable. It like raises a rate of sexual harassment because they're both in the same room at the same time, and stories could get confused. And if the genitalia is out for like the reason it's supposed to be used for, things just get blurry and it gets confusing. And at the same time, talking about how they feel discriminated, like I'll talk about this one of my other points, but there are these two athletes who would feel discriminated about. They were transgender, they were males, and they transitioned into females, and they felt discriminated because they weren't allowed to participate in a sporting event. But the thing is that males and females are different, and boys are stronger, and when they were able to participate, they destroyed everyone, and it wasn't fair. And a quote from one of the people who had lost them said, "We all know the outcome of the race before it even starts. It's demoralizing. I fully support them, and I'm happy that these athletes are being true to themselves. They should have the right to express themselves in school, but athletics have always had extra rules to keep the competition fair." So yeah.
Alright. So now do we go to our second point?
Their second
Oh.
Yeah, your second point.
Alright, it's mine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I am talking about there's a physical and psychological difference between males and females. So besides the reproductive parts, male and females, there's fundamental differences that translate into the way they behave from a very young age. There's a study published in the scientific journal Infant and Child Development that found that children choose to play with toys more common to their gender. So they put various of age groups, various of different cultures, races, and they put little boys in one room and a little girl in one room, and they placed out toys that would be gender specific to males and gender specific to females. And the little girls, a majority of them gravitated towards the one that was specific to their gender, and the males gravitated towards the ones that were specific to their gender. And students from the University of London also did this study, and they said that biological differences give boys an aptitude for mental rotation and more interest and ability in spatial processing, when girls are more interested in looking at faces and better at fine motor skills and manipulating objects. When we studied by preference in a familiar nursery setting with parents absent, the differences we saw were consistent with these aptitudes. And talking about the brain, another thing that we learned is that male brains nearly have 7 times more gray matter for activity, and then while females have nearly 10 times more white matter. And gray matter is the area where the brain's localized like all the information and the action processing centers in specific splotches in a specific area of the brain, and this can translate into like a tunnel vision way when they are doing something. And as a male, I'm sure you guys know that once you get focused on something, your whole focus is completely on that, and you like shut out the outside world, and you are very like specific into doing that. And then a female's white matter is a networking grid that connects the brain's gray matter and other processing centers to another. And the brain processing difference shows how females are more known to be good at multitasking and doing things better multiple different times and just being in a rut. And then the physical differences I wanted to talk about was in 2008, Connecticut has its state track meet, like I mentioned before, and the winner of the girls' 55-meter dash weren't your typical female athletes. They were both transgender women who transitioned from male into female, and their successes sparked a lot of controversy because they beat everyone, like hands down, and that is because of the physical differences. Males have denser, stronger bones and tendons and ligaments, and the chances for natural-born female athletes being able to win or have a chance is becoming less, and it's demoralizing to them.
Wait, so is your next point
what's
also sports?
So yeah, that's just like it's just an example
Okay,
of like
so
the
your next point
physical
is also
differences.
sports. Okay, so
Okay, well, we had our rebuttals because we couldn't really necessarily talk about the psychological, the indifferences and what the genesis of all of that is. So we focused it more on suicide rate and depression and medical stuff, but that stuff is not relevant to that point at all. So
What's wrong with it?
It really wouldn't make sense. Well, I can't justify how people feel that.
you should try. I don't know.
I can't do it with just by using depression as my point. It's on me. I'll take it. Just go on to the
Are you
next
sure?
point. Yeah,
Sure.
it's fine.
All right. So I'll just jump into my my point. Okay. So I have a question for you. Do you think transgender is biological, genetic, influenced by outside factors, or none of these? Well, I believe that it's genetical, and this is backed up by a research project that was done. So a great way to test if something is genetic is to look at twins. And so if a trait is passed on to identical twins, both the twins will have the trait. Whereas fraternal twins, it's likely that one will have the trait and one will not have the trait. And when we look at transgender cases of twins, both the twins are normally transgender, which points to it being a genetical thing. However, I don't think we should look at medical stuff at all, even. Because I want you both to think about your features. So girls, when you think about like what people first notice about you, is it your blonde hair? Hope, is it maybe your track ability and your jumping? Celine, you're in the States here, is it your distinct Norwegian accent? What if I told you that really the first feature that people notice about you isn't any of those things, but it's actually the thing that you had no say in at all, the thing that was assigned to you at birth by a third party? So we know that gender is not what's between your legs. It's multifaceted. And so to believe that gender could be just assigned to you is ridiculous. Like, I assign to you what I believe your most features are, but I'm sure both of you take your identity in something much larger and much greater than yourself. So that's just a little example to show you that, when we're looking at identity, it has to come from within, not from an outside party, right? Additionally, I would like to point out that there's been very little research done to see the differences between transgender people and cisgendered people. In a conclusive Washington Post article, it found that studies are very difficult to conduct because the fMRI tests to scan the brains of transgendered and cisgendered people are very expensive. And to find sample sizes of these people, it's very limited, unfortunately. As an example of this, I used a 1991 study which found that transgenders have a certain portion of the brain associated with the opposite sex, which was larger, and even though that supports the transgender argument, has been largely debunked because there was not enough sample size. And that's really the whole thing here, is there's not enough sample size, because transgender people make a small percent of the population, but really, we can't just leave them out because they're the minority, right? And speaking of minorities, let's go back to the civil rights cases. Medical factors only served to muddle the argument. In the 1800s, physicians told white slave owners that their black slaves had a high pain tolerance and therefore could take more of the severe punishments that were being doled out. So even if this was true, it serves only to continue to discriminate against the African Americans at the time. The same thing happened in the late 2000s when it was spread around that gay people live shorter and less healthy lives than straight people. Again, this just serves to muddle the argument against gay people here, though. And so we look at these cases now, though, and we're like, oh, that's terrible. How could, any physician say that, X, Y, and Z to make us discriminate? But that's what you guys are doing right now, right? You guys are trying to bring up all this medical stuff just to increase discrimination. Really, this is a free country, and we should make it that way for everyone. Right? And so our society's come a long way. Why should we put that at risk over a medical revelation, However, I don't want you to think that discrimination against transgender people is just hypothetical, because it's not. It's very real, and because of Trump's new religious freedom rule, healthcare providers essentially have a free pass to discriminate against transgender people because of their religious background. And even before this rule was passed, transgender people had it hard because 29% people reported they were denied some form of health treatment, and 21% of them experienced harsh language from a healthcare worker. So that means if the four of us were all transgendered and we all wanted healthcare, one of us would be denied simply for just being the identity that we are, you know? And it's not very fair. And so this is a very real problem too. Well, it might sound like, oh, you know, it's just healthcare. It's much more than that. I brought up earlier Laura Aerosmith, who's a female transgender. She moved, after getting her surgery, she moved from California to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And she was having some problems, you know, down there. And so she went to a gynecologist in Tulsa, and she was very nervous, but she saw the friendly secretary and got introduced. But when she got to see a doctor and it came out that she was transgender, the doctor stopped writing, put his hand down, and told her to go back to California. And now he told this to a girl who had tried to kill herself because she was unable to feel the gender she was. And so if she's not able to get the help that she needs, you know, those feelings I'm sure came back in full force, and that's very dangerous. So while it's bad, it can also have fatal consequences, as we just saw there with these transgender people. And so I want to leave you with a question: how much hate does a person have to? How much does a person have to hate another person, and that they would rather want that person dead than to be able to identify as they truly are?
That was very well said by my colleague Jacob.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
Oh.
Is that your rebuttal?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's my point.
Was that medical stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know about if it's genetical, because Ricky's friend, she is a transgender. She has a twin. She's the only one that is transgender. Both doesn't have to be transgenders. So, and it's feelings, mostly. Because as my example said above, she regrets her surgery. And her inbox is full of messages from people that regret their surgery. And I just need to find it. And she said, had I not been misled by media stories of sex change success and by medical practitioners who said transitioning was the answer to my problems, I would not have suffered as I had. Genetics cannot be changed, feelings, however, can and do change. So I would say that a lot of so I would say that a lot of reasons why people do this is because they feel like it, and there's no way you can prove it that it's not just a feeling. And yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Is it my third point?
Yeah. So
That's a good point.
That's
So
a rebuttal.
yeah.
So
So
it's
now
not
your
your
third
point.
point.
Now
is,
it's
yeah.
okay. Sports. So
I was reading your stuff. I'm like, oof. I was like, uh-oh.
okay, so there is a reason they started separating sports between men and women. The reason is that women has this huge disadvantage against males because men are on an average stronger, faster, and taller. And according to the website Fair Play for Women, the performance gap between male and female athletes are proven beyond doubt, based on decades of sporting records, and it ranges from 10 to 30%, depending on the sport. Boys are stronger than girls, and a study from the Journal of Applied Psychology says that men has an average of 26 pounds more skeletal muscle mass than women. Studies also says that women has about 40% less upper body strength and 33% less lower body strength. And in general, men are faster than women. The fastest woman in the world ran the 100-meter dash in 10.49 seconds in 1988. this is still the best time for a woman. In men's 2016 Olympics competition, the requirement to be qualified was 10:16 or less. So the fastest woman in the world wouldn't even be able to compete against men. This shows how unfair it is if transgender male can compete against females. Another example is a bronze medalist in cycling world title, Jan Wanger Asali, who lost to Rachel McKinnon by identifying himself as a man until he was 29. Is it really fair that a 29-year-old man can change their gender and compete against women?
Right. So first, I want to address the first thing you said, which I feel is a little sexist, because we look at athletes that we know, like Josie Pels. She goes to those meets and she's pole vaulting. She's beating most of the men. So with a lot of hard work, I feel like it can be done. But let's ignore that. So have you heard of Semenya, who runs in Africa? Okay, well, if you haven't, I'm going to learn you something. So she has found to be a very high level of testosterone in her body, and that was found to be natural. And so, the race directors were telling her, hey, you have to, cut down on your testosterone, you have to take these blockers. Now, I ask you, is that fair to make something, which is natural to her, be blocked to make fair competition? Can't answer. So, these transgender people, they really are, who they feel they are. And so I don't think it's fair in the same way to say, this is part of them. You can't tell them to not be themselves, right? And I think it's funny that you brought up the cycling world championships, because I use the same example. And as we know, a transgender female won. And you brought up what the bronze medalist said, but let me tell you what the silver medalist said. She said, no one is transgender to steal anyone's medal. We had an honest race under UCI rules. If you compete, you accept the rules. Otherwise, don't compete. I can only imagine what she had to go through in her life to be where she is now. How hard it is to fit in. And really, right? Nobody, these transgender athletes, they are not, switching to the other gender because they want to win a couple medals. I don't think that's rational. They're doing it because that's who they really are. And the winner of that race said, by catering to cisgender people's views, that furthest transgender people's oppression when it comes to extending rights to a minority population, why would we ask the majority? Which is, the same thing as we go back to civil rights. If you ask the majority white people, hey, what should we do with all these slaves? I'm sure they weren't clamoring to let them go, especially in the South, right? And so, IOC guidelines even require transgender athletes to block the testosterone, which, we can talk about it, that's fair another day. But those are the rules. And, like the silver medalist said, if you don't like the rules, then don't compete. I'm sure there's other leagues where you could find, private leagues where you could race and win and, get the gold medals you so desire. And I think that's really against, human rights. This is who they are. And it's not fair to, let them not race, because racing is a human right, as it is said in the Olympic honor code. And so if we're just going to, tell a whole group of people that they can't, it doesn't really seem that fair.
So our last point is just gonna stem from the issues concerning the transgender community and how resolving them will not benefit no one. And I say that, and it's very poorly worded, but what I mean by it is you will not lose anything by giving. You'll be gaining more by giving more away. So, thank you. I know. I thought I worded that one better. Despite increased visibility of transgender in this country, if we look at celebrities, I can't name any celebrities, but Bruce Jenner. Celebrity. I don't know many transgender celebrities. Many Americans still don't personally know anyone who's transgender, let alone understand the concept, I believe. But the number is still growing rapidly. Transgender people come from all walks of life, and we've seen that in sports, medicinal treatments, everyday life. We're all people living in a society here, but representing certain backgrounds, certain faiths, and we have this transgender, this very word that is coined as an umbrella term, which spreads out over this entire society And in this modern definition, it only comes to use only in this specific time. Now many questions that arise to that, but people who would fit under that definition could have existed in every single culture that we could record in history. So the question is not that what does it mean to be transgender, it's why accepting these people, as we should with all people, should be our goal, especially as Christians. I'm going to read you something that might sound a little familiar. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of the lawyers asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is the like. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." It doesn't matter what it means to be transgender. Look at the challenges these people are facing. Lack of legal protection that we've discussed in the first point. Poverty. In too many cases in the United States, the lack of legal protection translates into unemployment for transgender people. Harassment, stigmas, anti-transgender violence. At least 13 transgender women were murdered in 2014. And in 2015, the numbers were set to be higher. These people were stabbed, shot, strangled, burned by intimate partners or strangers. Merely strangers. Barriers to healthcare, which we've pointed out. Identity documents, because identity is probably the most controversial thing that we can look at in our society with how people are trying to identify themselves. While advocates continue to work for the remedies of these disparities, change cannot come too soon for these people. So what's our vocation as a Christian nation then? What can we do to help? What should we do? And I think you guys know the clear answer to that. It's not too visible for these people, and especially for us, it is visible. Positive images of transgender people in the media and society continues to make a difference in us, and it should inspire us. We've seen it in the silver medalists' words. It doesn't come enough with us, but without real risks to our safety, which we should be, as a neighbor, we should be giving our all to them. That is why we have a commitment to them. They are entitled to us just as Jacob is entitled to me, just as you are entitled to me, just as you are entitled to me. What? We have to continue to support them and to advocate for this community. Because for all those transgender Americans out there who are and will become maybe friends, people of close acquaintances, neighbors, co-workers, maybe not family members, I hope not, but point being, everyone should have the equal chance to succeed and thrive in this world. And that's why we are here. That is what our calling is to do for all people. That wraps up my talk.
Okay, so as a vocation, I agree we are to serve and love all of our neighbors, and talking about poverty, violence, hate crimes, it can be said about multiple different various groups of people, not just transgender. So why do we put all of our attention and all of our efforts into the transgender movement just for those people? Because at the same time, when you're wanting me, let's say like I'm a parent of my child and you're wanting me to change my ways and my views and my beliefs just to fit this person's beliefs and put my child, whom I love and care about very much, in an awkward position and makes me feel uncomfortable because we are trying to fit all of their needs. If we want to go based off of feelings and what they're feeling and particular feeling needs, then I should get the way that I feel get handed to me every way I want. And I should be treated for what I feel all the time. And besides the fact of, with this transgender movement, I feel like the media, it portrays it in such a positive light for all these people, like moving it like, yeah, let's do it, everyone be transgender. If you want to be, just love yourself. Like, it's great, wonderful, everyone should be happy. But at the same time, the social push, and it has been started from a very young age. And there are people like this young man named Walt Heyer who started his transition, or so he thought, at the age of 4 because his grandma cross-dressed him. Because the media was telling people, oh, he likes girlier things, he has more girly tendencies. Therefore, oh, you should just transition into this thing and be what you want to be, even though it's totally okay for him for a male to be male, but like things that would be considered female. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the times the people who do transition, the stuff like depression, anxiety, all of those different like mental illnesses do not go away. They're still with them. Just because they physically change themselves, it doesn't change what they're feeling on the inside and their mental state. And some of the times it's happened to Mr. Walt. He transitioned into Laura when he was 42 years old, and he was her for 8 years. And then he transitioned or went through the process of detransitioning, because when he was Laura, he thought that all of his problems would be solved. His depression, anxiety, his guilt for not being a good enough granddaughter to his grandma, you know what I'm saying? And all that stuff changed, and I lost my train of thought. And basically, it's not the answer to everything. There's different ways to help and treat these people instead of like giving them more rights. Obviously, we need to come like no one should be getting killed for just stupid reasons, you know, like that's an obvious fact. But at the same time, we should not focus all of our attention toward trying to fixate towards their needs, but get to the core of the actual person and what they're feeling and try to fix them. And maybe it is because they're depressed, and maybe it is a mental illness, or maybe it is, wow, they really do want to be a male or a female, but we should just focus on them and what they need versus just a social push. Everyone, if you feel this way, just be transgender, it'll fix all your problems, and we're going to fixate to your feelings because then my feelings don't matter. That's all.
Is that your conclusion?
My conclusion is it's pretty simple and short and sweet to the point. In the end, the transgender debate is still going on, and the movement is still going to go on, and I think it's actually like not even at its peak right now, and it's continuing to get larger. But despite what they think or feel, there is a difference between gender, and it's something that we cannot change. It's been since the beginning of time. Male and female were created differently with different roles, different body parts. It's just a difference that there is. And the advocates need to realize and think about the person and the pain that they are feeling instead of focusing on furthering this whole transitioning and the idea of transgenderism on them in society.
Okay. For our conclusion, in conclusion, we believe that transgenders should be able to identify and be recognized as the gender they are. This is because they have been a marginalized group of people who have been continually facing more discrimination, and as we look back in history, we have seen these types of parallels. We have overcome it in the past, and I believe we can do it again if we allow them to associate with the gender they believe they really are. And I think that's, yeah.
Good job, guys. You did it.